I genuinely don't know how to feel about this book. Hello lovelies, thank you so much for joining me for today's video. So, real talk. Have you ever read a book and just not known what to think? It wasn't bad in a technical sense, but it wasn't good in an emotional sense. Like, it got a very strong emotional and visceral reaction out of you, but that reaction wasn't a positive experience for you as the reader. That's kind of where I am with this book. The Queen's Assassin by Melissa de la Cruz. Now, this review isn't an installment in the DNF series, so obviously the book was at least good enough for me to finish, I'll acknowledge that. So, what's The Queen's Assassin about? What drew me to it in the first place? Well, it's a fantasy romance set in the fictional world of Avantine. Keldon Holt is a Queen's Assassin. This means that he is in service to Queen Liliana of Renovia to recover the scrolls of Dia. The scrolls are very important magical scrolls that went missing after the Battle of Bear Abbey, which was the tail end of a war between the Kingdom of Renovia and a secret society called the Afrasians. The war ended with the Afrasians being chased into hiding, but before they left, they, one, killed the king of Renovia, Espan, and they took the scrolls. Keldon's father, Cordon, was an advisor to Queen Liliana, and after the death of the king, he entered into a blood pact with her. Until the scrolls were recovered, Cordon and his descendants would be at service to the queen and her descendants as Queen's Assassins. A blood pact isn't exactly something you can run from until the pact is complete. Keldon learned that the hard way when the burden fell to his shoulders. The only chance for freedom Keldon has is to find the scrolls and return them to the queen. On the other hand, there is Shadow, the daughter of one of the queen's ladies-in-waiting. Shadow's mother was also a part of the Hearthstone Guild, which was created to undermine the Afrasians and their monopolization of magic powers in the Kingdom of Renovia. Shadow has been raised by her aunts for most of her life, but her mother occasionally comes to visits, and they always tell stories about adventures that they had in the guild. Shadow grew up thinking that she would one day join the guild. Turns out that wasn't the case. Shadow's destiny was to become a lady-in-waiting to the queen, like her mother, so she would end up joining the court of Renovia, where there's no adventure pretty much at all. And Shadow is not here for it. Keldon and Shadow's paths finally cross at Bear Abbey, where he saves her from an assassin. Unfortunately, that assassin turns out to be the Grand Prince. You know, King Espan's little brother, Alast. This, of course, makes Keldon look like he just killed a member of the royal family, which is, of course, treachery. Of course, Queen Liliana knows that Alast was a traitor, but she doesn't want her enemies to know that she knows.
They thought that they could mess with us? They're trying to mess with us? They don't know that we know they know we know.
Basically, Keldon has to be sent to prison for his actions, and he will ultimately be released by another person who works for the queen, who will ultimately get him out of Renovia. Shadow feels guilty that Keldon was arrested because of her, but she also realizes that this is her opportunity to prove that she can do good in the guild. The night before Shadow is set to go to the court of Renovia, she dresses as a boy and sneaks away to the prison where Keldon is being held. She poses as a stable boy and ultimately gets him out of prison. You can probably figure out the general synopsis of the story from here. These two main characters go on a dangerous mission to find out more about these traitors and the Afrasians that seem to be resurfacing, and all the while they end up falling in love despite the walls that they've put around themselves due to their circumstances. This book is written in limited third person and present writing tense, and it switches between Shadow's perspective and Kaeldon's, just so that we can get both sides of the story. For all intents and purposes, this book had a lot going for it to become one of my favorites. A strong leading female, a strong but cold leading male, forbidden love, fantasy, danger, intrigue, sexual tension. It was actually very similar to An Assassin's Guide to Love and Treason, which I gave a 5-star review to. So why am I so unsure with this book? Well, there are little things. In some places, it feels like the relationship and the dynamic between Kaeldon and Shadow takes a complete 180 turn from where they had previously left off, with no real good reason. They go from barely being able to tolerate each other to wanting to bone each other pretty much within a page turn. If it was in a hate fucking way, I could get it, but it didn't really have that vibe for me. It felt more like they wanted to make love. Then there was the ultimate villain reveal at the end. It was surprising but unsatisfying, and I think that's because it felt kind of rushed. And then there is a moment towards the end where all of the truths have come out and Shadow and Kaeldon are talking about them. And I'm not sure if the entire conversation is a lie or a continuity error. I don't feel like this conversation filled in any plot holes that even remotely made sense. In fact, there were more plot holes at the end of this conversation than there were before the conversation. All of these things are relatively small, and I would normally only knock off maybe 1.5 stars for all of them put together. So why am I still unsure about how I feel? It was the overall ending that's got me a little bit reeling. Without putting any spoilers in this video, it's difficult for me to cover what exactly happened. What I will say is that I was crying for the last 5 chapters. It was not a happy cry, and it was definitely an ugly cry. And then by the very, very end of the book, I was indifferent at best. And even though I was indifferent, I was still unhappily ugly crying. I think that's the reaction Melissa wanted from anybody who read this book. I don't know her personally, so who can say? If I'm right and that is the reaction she wanted, then she's a successful writer in that aspect. But I don't read to cry, feel sad, or get angry. I read to escape from the bullshit that is this real world. In other words, I'm someone who needs a realistically happy ending. I know a lot of people look down on happy endings in books because that's not realistic or interesting. If I wanted to read a book that was so tragic that it read as realism or nonfiction, I would watch the news. And I personally think that happy endings are more interesting than unhappy ones. They happen so rarely in this real world that we can't help but be captivated by them. I'm not saying that everyone needs to survive or be happy, and not all of the villains need to be reformed, if any of them need to be reformed. But the people who have been through the most shit, which is more often than not the protagonists, they do need to survive, and they need to be reasonably happy by the end of the book. The Hunger Games is a really good example of a series of books that ends in a realistically happy ending. Not everyone survives, but the main characters do. And yeah, they're scarred, but they're happy. In my opinion, The Queen's Assassin doesn't have a happy ending or even a realistically happy ending. It has a harshly realistic ending that doesn't leave you feeling good or better about yourself or confident in the power of love, which I'm pretty sure is what romance is supposed to do. If Melissa didn't want her readers to feel any of those things by the end of the book, that's fine. That's her prerogative. But that doesn't make it an enjoyable read for me, at least. And for me, the ending was just so sad and depressing that I had to stay up an extra 40 minutes past my bedtime Yes, I have a bedtime. I know I'm a grown adult, but I need to function. Leave me alone. To watch Veggie Tales, just so I could feel normal and get back to a point where I might actually be able to sleep.
Bundy, 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 Bundy. Here we go, Bundy. Come on.
That literally has never happened before. I have never had to watch Veggie Tales just to feel better after reading a book. Now, normally I would just chalk all of these emotions that I had up to the book just not being for me. I would give it a rating, I would say who I would recommend it to, and I would move on. But I have to wonder if my feelings were accurate. I'm going to be making a bonus video about this subject later on this week, so just sit tight. Normally, I would give a rating for a book right here, but because I'm not sure if what I'm feeling is accurate, I'm hesitant to do so. But I suppose I must, so as it stands now, I guess I'd have to give The Queen's Assassin 3 stars out of 5. In terms of who I would recommend this book to, I'd recommend it to anybody who likes to read young adult fantasy, who doesn't mind that things end less than ideally. Well, that's all I have for you today. If you liked this video, don't forget to bitch slap that like button, and while you're at it, why don't you bitch slap that subscribe button and flick that bell so you can be notified every time I upload a new video, including the bonus video that's coming soon. My book, Starforged Orion, is available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, as well as Barnes & Noble. My play, How Are You, is also available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. If you'd like to find other ways to support me, go ahead and check out my Patreon. I'm just saying you can become a beta reader if you wanted to. And don't forget to check out my social media sites if you want more content. Toodles!